Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Handbook of Conflict Resolution, Theory and Practice, 3rd edition. Edited by Peter T. Coleman, Morton Deutsch, and Eric C. Marcus. Narrated by Timothy Andrés Pabon. Publisher's note: this audiobook has bonus material. Please contact whomever you purchase this audiobook from to request the material. All figures, tables, and exhibits referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. Preface. The field of conflict resolution continues to develop rapidly. As a consequence, we have updated and revised the 2nd edition of this handbook. Almost all of the chapters in the 2nd edition have been updated. In some, the revisions have been extensive, and in others, only minor changes seemed necessary. Also, we have added new chapters on topics that were not covered or needed more coverage than they received in the first 2 editions. Given the scope of growth in the field, we have expanded the book considerably, and in order to make this expansion more cost-effective for the readership, we have developed a new online section of the book. The new chapters for this edition have an asterisk next to them in the contents. They are important, original contributions to the field of conflict resolution by outstanding scholars and practitioners, as are the updated chapters from the first 2 editions. In the preface to the first edition, we characterize the purpose of the handbook, its organization, professional value, and orientation. This book is meant for those who wish to deepen their understanding of the processes involved in conflicts and their knowledge of how to manage them constructively. It provides the theoretical underpinnings that shed light on the fundamental social psychological processes involved in understanding and managing conflicts at all levels: interpersonal, intergroup, organizational, and international. As an area of scholarship and professional practice, conflict resolution is relatively young, having emerged as a discipline after World War II. Practice and theory have been only loosely linked. This book aims to foster closer connection between the two by demonstrating the relevance of theoretical ideas and empirical research to practice. Although the link between theory and practice is inherently bidirectional, this book primarily emphasizes the path from theory to practice. The theoretical ideas presented in this book were for the most part not developed specifically in relation to understanding conflict or to facilitate professional practice in this area. They have relevance to any area in which it is important to understand the basic processes in social interactions of all sorts and in various contexts, at work, in politics, schools, families, clinics, courts, and bedrooms, on highways and elsewhere. For the purposes of this book, the authors have developed their chapters to bring out the relevance of the theories and research being discussed to understanding conflict specifically. When appropriate, chapters are organized to address 3 general topics. The first deals with the theoretical ideas and the substantive area being discussed. The second draws out the implications of these ideas for understanding conflict, and the third is concerned with the implications of these ideas for educating or training people to manage their conflicts more constructively. The Handbook of Conflict Resolution is divided into parts somewhat arbitrarily, and inevitably there is overlap among them. The introductory chapter gives examples of real conflicts and indicates the kinds of questions one might pose to understand what is going on in the conflicts, questions that are addressed in many of the chapters. The introduction also has a brief discussion of the orientations of practitioners on the one hand and research theorists on the other, to offer some insight into the misunderstandings that often occur between these 2 groups. It also contains an abbreviated history of the study of conflict from a social psychological perspective and indicates the sorts of questions that have been and are being addressed. Parts 1 through 4 comprise the major portion of the book and present the theoretical ideas that have been developed, mainly in areas of social psychology, that are useful in understanding conflict processes as well as in helping people learn to manage their conflicts constructively. The authors of the chapters in these parts discuss the practical implications of their ideas for conflict, as well as the theoretical foundations underlying the implications they draw. Even apart from their usefulness for conflict, the theoretical ideas should be of value to anyone interested in understanding the nature of basic social psychological processes and involved in social interactions of any kind. The contents for parts 1 through 4 indicate the broad range of theoretical ideas and their implications for conflict. They are grouped arbitrarily into interpersonal and intergroup processes, intrapsychic and intergroup processes, personal differences, and creativity and change. Almost all of the chapters discuss matters that cross such arbitrary boundaries. New chapters, chapters 3, 14, and 15, respectively, deal with privilege and justice, group decision-making, and gender as they relate to conflict. Part 5 contains 4 chapters that consider the relation between culture and conflict, each from a somewhat different perspective. Chapters 25 through 27, all new chapters, examine some of the common sorts of misunderstanding that can arise when people from varying cultural backgrounds interact, and what can be done to help them learn to understand one another's cultural background. Then, Chapter 28 examines an influential theoretical approach to conflict resolution developed in the United States to see how it is or is not applicable to conflict in the entirely different context of China. Part 6 is concerned with difficult conflicts. 2 revised chapters, 29 and 30, examine aggression and violence and intractable conflict, respectively. 2 new chapters have been added. Chapter 31 is focused on the connections between human rights and conflicts, and Chapter 32 on terrorism. Part 7 is most directly concerned with practice. Its 11 chapters are all authored by leaders in the field and focus on theory and research behind common models of practice, such as negotiation, 33, mediation, 34, the Coleman Narrator model for training in constructive conflict resolution, 35, dialogue processes, 36, and John Gottman's model of conflict management with couples, 37. These chapters then go on to strategies for working with larger groups, 38, employing group relations theory, 39, reconciliation between groups, 40, and employing social network theory to conflict analysis and resolution, 41. Chapter 42 focuses on using research findings in practice, and Chapter 43 on nonviolence and conflict. In Part 8, we look to the future. Chapter 44 presents a framework for thinking about research on conflict resolution training. As of this writing, there has been little good and systematic research in this area. If the field is to develop and have a bright future, it needs more research. Chapter 45 presents the author's views of the future directions that basic research on conflict and its resolution might well take. The concluding chapter is an overview and commentary on the current state of the field. It considers issues such as what substantive questions need to be addressed that have not received the attention they warrant, that is, the practice as well as theoretical issues. The final, online section contains what we have labeled our domain-specific chapters. The expert authors of these chapters were asked to familiarize themselves with the basic processes chapters of this handbook, and then to speak to these models and practices in their chapters, making links to existing chapters explicit. They include chapters in the following domains: Gender Conflict in Marriage, Chapter 46, Conflict Resolution in Schools, 47, Conflict in Organizations, 48, Labor Relations and Conflict, 49, Law and Dispute Resolution, 50, Police and Conflict Resolution, 51, Participatory Action Research, Conflict Resolution and Communities, 52, Religion as a Third Side for Peace, 53, Non-Governmental Organizations as a Vehicle for Collective Action, 54, Managing Environmental Conflict, 55, and International Conflict Resolution, 56. The contributors to this edition of the Handbook of Conflict Resolution are an illustrious group of experts in the areas with which their chapters are concerned. We have asked them to write chapters that can be easily understood by readers who are not social scientists, but who are also credible to other experts in their areas. Furthermore, we suggested to them that they limit considerably the number of technical references in their chapter. Given the opaqueness of much writing in the social sciences, it is surprising how well the contributors have succeeded in writing clear, informative, interesting, useful, and authoritative chapters. We believe the Handbook of Conflict Resolution is accessible and valuable to a wide variety of groups with an interest in constructive conflict management, to undergraduate and graduate students, as well as their professors, in a number of academic fields such as psychology, education, sociology, political science, business, international relations, law, social work, and healthcare. It is also of value to practitioners such as conflict resolution trainers and consultants, negotiators, mediators, and those who manage or supervise others. In editing this handbook, we have learned a great deal, so we believe that even those considered experts can find much of value in it. One final word about the orientation of this handbook. It is concerned with finding cooperative, win-win solutions to conflict, no matter how difficult. The black arts of conflict, such as violence, coercion, intimidation, deceit, blackmail, and seduction, are not discussed, except if at all, in the context of how to respond to or prevent the use of such tactics by oneself or others. In our view, such tactics are used too often, are commonly destructive and self-defeating, and are less productive in the long run than a constructive approach. We thank our faculty colleagues who participated in an informal seminar on conflict resolution at Teachers College. The inspiration for this book emerged from the lively discussions in the seminar. We also thank Elizabeth Hernandez, Joseph Dillard, Kyung Mazzaro, Nick Redding, Christine Chung, and Regina Kim, who typed, emailed, did editorial work, and provided other invaluable services necessary to produce a completed manuscript. January 2014, Peter T. Coleman, Morton Deutsch, and Eric C. Marcus, New York, New York. Introduction. Morton Deutsch. In this introduction, I give some examples of conflicts and indicate the kinds of questions one might pose to understand what is going on in the conflicts, questions that are addressed in many of the following chapters. It also includes a brief discussion of the orientations of both practitioners and researcher theorists to provide some insight into the misunderstandings that often occur between these two groups. It concludes with an abbreviated history of the study of conflict from a social psychological perspective. A conflict between husband and wife. Some time ago, I had the opportunity to do therapeutic work with a professional couple involved in bitter conflicts over issues they considered non-negotiable. The destructiveness of their way of dealing with their conflicts was reflected in their tendency to escalate a dispute about almost any specific issue, e.g., a household chore, the child's bedtime, into a power struggle in which each spouse felt that his or her self-esteem or core identity was at stake. The destructive process resulted in, as well as from, justified mutual suspicion, correctly perceived mutual hostility, a win-lose orientation to their conflicts, a tendency to act so as to lead the other to respond in a way that would confirm one's worst suspicion, inability to understand and empathize with the other's needs and vulnerabilities, and reluctance, based on stubborn pride, nursed grudges, and fear of humiliation, to initiate or respond to a positive, generous action so as to break out of the escalating vicious cycle in which they were trapped. Many couples in such conflicts do not seek help. They continue to abuse one another, sometimes violently, or they break up. The couple I worked with sought help for several reasons. On the one hand, their conflicts were becoming physically violent. This frightened them, and it also ran counter to their strongly held intellectual values regarding violence. On the other hand, there were strong constraints making it difficult for them to separate. Their child would suffer. They felt they would be considerably worse off economically, and they had mutually congenial intellectual, aesthetic, sexual, and recreational interests that would be difficult to continue engaging in together if they separated. As is often the case in such matters, it was the woman, being less ashamed to admit the need for help, who took the initiative to seek the assistance of a skilled third party. The wife, who worked, and preferred to do so, wanted the husband to share equally in the household and child care responsibilities. She considered equality of the genders to be a core personal value. The husband wanted a traditional marriage with a conventional division of responsibilities in which he would be the primary income-producing worker outside the home, while his wife would principally do the work related to the household and child care. The husband considered household work and child care inconsistent with his deeply rooted image of adult masculinity. The conflict seemed non-negotiable to the couple. For the wife, it would mean betrayal of her feminist values to accept her husband's terms. For him, it would violate his sense of male adult identity to become deeply involved in housework and child care. Yet this non-negotiable conflict became negotiable when, with the help of the therapist, the husband and wife were able to listen to and really understand the other's feelings and how their respective life experiences had led them to the views each held. Understanding the other's position fully and the feelings and experiences behind them made each person feel less hurt and humiliated by the other's position and readier to seek solutions that would accommodate the interests of both. They realized that with their joint incomes, they could afford to pay for household and child care help that would enable the wife to be considerably less burdened by such responsibilities without increasing the husband's chores in these areas, though doing so, of course, lessened the amount of money they had available for other purposes. This solution was not perfect for either partner. Each would have preferred that the other share his or her own view of what a marriage should be like, but their deeper understanding of the other's position made them feel less humiliated and threatened by it and less defensive toward the other. It also enabled them to negotiate a mutually acceptable agreement that lessened tensions despite the continuing differences in basic perspective. See Deutsch, 1988. An intergroup conflict at a school. A conflict has developed between two groups of teachers at a high school in New York City, the Black Teacher Caucus, BTC, and the newly formed Site-Based Management, SBM Committee. The SBM Committee's 18 members consist of the principal, the union chairperson, a representative from the Parents Association, a student, and an elected teacher representative from each academic department. All of the SBM members are European American, with the exception of an African American teacher chosen from the math department. At the last SBM meeting, the math teacher proposed that an official voting seat be designated for an African American teacher. After much heated discussion, the proposal was voted down, but the problems raised by the proposal did not go away. Much personal bitterness has ensued. The school has experienced a recent demographic shift from a predominantly white student body to one that is now mainly composed of students of color. This has occurred for two reasons. First, there has been a large influx of students of color from the city-owned housing projects constructed in the district during the past 2 years. Second, as a result, the number of science-oriented students coming from other parts of the city has dropped. The student population is now 40% African American, 30% Latino American, 25% European American, and 5% Asian American. The faculty is 90% European American and 10% African American. The Parents Association is 100% European American. The position of the BTC. The BTC believes that the SBM committee needs its input to make the changes needed. Specifically, the curriculum is Eurocentric, and many school policies are out of touch with the cultural perspective of the current student population. In addition, the caucus is very concerned about an increase in bias-related incidents in the community and wants to initiate anti-racism classes at all grade levels. The members of the BTC believe that although the majority of the management committee members are sincerely interested in bringing about positive school change and are good, dedicated teachers, they lack personal understanding of the impact of racism on the African American experience. Some even seem to still value the old melting pot approach to race relations, a position the caucus members believe is naive and dysfunctional when it comes to positive educational change. The BTC believes that having its representative present as a voting member on the committee will add a needed multicultural and anti-racist perspective at this critical time of change. The caucus wants to be part of this change and will not take no for an answer. The position of the European American SBM committee members. There are many reasons the European Americans voted against an African American seat on the SBM committee, and they deeply resent the implication that they are racists for doing so. First, they believe that if any particular black teacher wants a seat, he or she should go through regular democratic procedures and get elected by the respective department. New elections will be held in May. Second, it would not be fair to give a special seat to the black teachers without opening up other seats for the Latino, Asian, Jewish, Greek, or you name it teachers. SBM is about department representation, the members say, not about representation based on race or ethnicity. Third, designating a seat for blacks or establishing quotas of any kind based on race would give the appearance of catering to pressure from a special interest group and be difficult to explain to the rest of the faculty and the Parents Association. They believe that the best direction for the school and society as a whole is a colorblind policy that would assimilate all races and ethnic groups into the great American melting pot. The site management members sincerely believe that they do not discriminate because of race, and they resent the implication that they are incapable of teaching children of color. The principal of the school, who is strongly committed to both site-based management and multiculturalism, very much wants this conflict to be resolved constructively. After several months of unproductive discussions between the two groups, during which they become progressively hardened in their respective positions, the principal calls in a mediator to help the groups resolve their conflict. By various means over a period of time, she, as well as the principal, encourages a civil problem-solving discussion of the issue. Together the groups brainstorm and come up with 27 ideas for handling the problem. Ultimately, they agree on one solution as being the best. Each year, the principal will appoint 7 faculty members to a multicultural task force that reflects the student composition. 2 of the task force members will also be members of the SBM committee, 1 to be elected by the task force members, and 1 selected from the ethnic group most heavily represented in the student population. The solution, though not perfect, is acceptable to both sides and is implemented to the satisfaction of the teachers. It goes on contributing to the reduction of intergroup tensions as well as to the effectiveness of the SBM committee. The conflict in Northern Ireland. As Cairns and Darby point out, the conflict in Northern Ireland is at its most basic a struggle between those who wish to see Northern Ireland remain part of the United Kingdom and those who wish to see the reunification of the island of Ireland. The roots of the conflict go back centuries, to the period when the English colonized the island, occupied 95% of the land, and introduced a community of foreigners, mainly Scottish Protestants, in Northern Ireland. They became a majority in this area, in contrast to a Catholic majority in the Republic of Ireland. Cairns and Darby also state that years of oppression by the colonists and rebellion by the native Irish culminated in the Treaty of 1921, which partitioned the island into 2 sections, the 6 predominantly Protestant counties of the north, which remained an integral part of the United Kingdom, and the 26 mainly Catholic counties of the south, which separated from the United Kingdom, page 755, and ultimately became known as the Republic of Ireland. Despite the partition, significant violence has occurred periodically in Northern Ireland. The use of the terms Catholic and Protestant to label the conflicting groups is not meant to indicate that the conflict is primarily a religious one, although that is an element. A small sector of the Protestant population is virulently anti-Catholic and fears for its religious freedom if union occurs with the Republic of Ireland, whose population is 98% Catholic. The Irish Roman Catholic hierarchy has heavily influenced its laws in such matters as divorce and birth control. Other elements come into play as well. The Catholics mainly consider themselves to be Irish, while the Protestants prefer to be viewed as British. Economic inequality has been an important factor in fueling the conflict. There has been considerably more unemployment, less education, and poorer housing among the Catholics as compared with the Protestants. The two communities are largely separated psychologically, even though they are not always physically separated. Each has developed separate social identities that affect how the members in each community view themselves and the people of the community. The social identities of the two groups have been negatively related until recently. A perceived gain for one side is usually associated with a perceived loss for the other. Although the costs of the intergroup conflict in Northern Ireland have been relatively small compared to ethnic conflicts in areas such as Rwanda, Lebanon, Bosnia, Sri Lanka, Kosovo, and Syria, they have not been insignificant. Taking into account population size, the deaths due to violence in Northern Ireland are equivalent to 500,000 deaths in the United States. There are not only the direct costs of violence in terms of death and injury, about 3,000 killed and 30,000 injured between 1969 and 1994, but also the indirect, harder-to-measure economic and mental health costs. Some of these costs were borne by England, the economic, psychological, and political toll from seeing some of its soldiers attacked and killed in an attempt to control the violence. Over the years, various attempts have been made to reduce the explosiveness of the conflict, including efforts by the Northern Ireland government to improve the economic situation of the Catholics, stimulation of intergroup contact under favorable circumstances, conduct of intergroup workshops for influential leaders in both groups, organization of women's groups that conducted demonstrations against violence, integration of some of the Catholic and Protestant schools, recognition and honoring of the cultural traditions of both groups, and so forth. Many of these efforts were sabotaged by extremist groups on both sides. However, cumulatively they began to create the recognition that peaceful relations might be possible and that continued violence would not lead to victory for either side. Most of the ordinary people on both sides became increasingly alienated from the perpetrators of violence. The conditions for possible successful negotiation of a solution to the conflict were beginning to develop. The heads of three interested and concerned governments, President Bill Clinton of the United States, Prime Minister Tony Blair of Great Britain, and Prime Minister Bertie Ahern of Ireland, played key roles in getting the leaders of the various factions involved in the conflict to the negotiating table. Appointing former U.S. Senator George Mitchell, a highly respected and influential political figure, as a mediator was an important, positive step. He was acceptable to both sides and was a well-practiced, skilled political mediator. There have been substantial popular votes in Northern Ireland, as well as in Ireland, in favor of an agreement negotiated among leaders of the main Protestant and Catholic factions in Northern Ireland that was hoped would end their protracted, sometimes violent, conflict. The agreement was developed with the aid of a skillful mediator and with strong pressures from the leaders of the three interested governments in constant telephone contact with the negotiators during the difficult phases of the process. In coming to an agreement, each of the conflicting parties had to modify long-held positions, reduce their aspirations, and act with greater civility toward one another, as well as bring the extremists in their groups under control. This was difficult to do. the level of distrust among the conflicting groups is still very high.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?